Hey there, Parker X listeners. This is Brett Wood, and in today's conversation, we're going to talk with Mike Drow from T2 and Peter Lange from Texas A&M University. We'll start with how they stumbled into the parking industry from various backgrounds, their role in shaping the IPMI Technology Committee, and the industry-changing research that group has conducted over the last 10 years. We'll talk about the Tech Committee's role in data standards development through the Alliance for Parking Data Standards. What does technology and data integration look like today and into the future? What's the end game of improved data standards and analytics? We'll talk about the power of data to drive better policy and practice and operations in our parking and mobility programs. And finally, how the parking industry can drive change throughout the expanding mobility ecosystem. Hope you enjoy. Okay, this is Brett Wood with Parker X, and with me today is Mike Drow from T2 and Peter Lange from Texas A&M, and we're going to talk a little bit about your history in parking and the work that y'all have been doing, both respectively with your organizations and the IPMI Technology Committee and the kind of things you're seeing. So we'd like to start off on the podcast by just understanding how you got into parking and your background, and maybe just give us a few minutes of what that's like.
Thanks, Brett. This is pretty kind of cool. This is my first podcast, so thank you for the opportunity to participate and play. I like to say I got tricked into parking. So going back 22 years ago, I worked for the Atlanta Regional Commission, which is the MPO for the Atlanta area, and was in their commute options program as on the IT side, technical support side of their operation, doing ride matching and things like that, implementing software. And they would do outreach to all the big employment centers around town, and Georgia Tech was one of those. And one of our outreach guys left, went down to Georgia Tech, and then recruited me to come down there and started doing their technical support and implementing parking software, fixing things that hadn't been working in a long time, and then trying to get web enable their parking operation and do things like that. And I was there for about 4 years, and then got recruited to go out to Texas A&M, and been out there for 16 years now. I'm the associate vice president of transportation services there, which is a big operation. Not only the parking side of the house, but the transit side of the house, and then we're also responsible for the university's fleet, which is about 600 vehicles, and we've got maintenance shops and gas stations and all the things that go along with that. But like when I tell the story, my favorite part of the story is that when I went to left Atlanta Regional Commission and went to Georgia Tech, the guy that recruited me and then the director, both great guys, the guy that recruited me that I worked with at ARC left about a week after I got there, and then the director left about 4 weeks after I got there. So that was my sort of the connections to the world and the safety nets and safety lines and things like that. The people that I knew were gone, and but it was great time, very dynamic. Learn from going out with the enforcement folks and writing tickets and seeing what they do, and getting to see absolutely every inch of the operation and help to reshape that program. It's a great program today, but I'd like to think that helped lay the foundations almost 20 years ago for that program.
I do like the fact that the folks that recruited you were their de facto replacement without knowing you were the de facto replacement. Like, this guy, we're going to get him.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Yeah.
We're lucky that they didn't hold you back.
Yes.
Thanks, Brett, as well. This is my first podcast, so I'm excited about the opportunity to do this. I came to parking in about 2005 or 2004. Before that, I was in oil and chemicals. I would build and run power plant or oil terminals, chemical plants, and build pipelines. I was then involved in aircraft and rail car leasing, and then got involved in more of a digital logistics, kind of working with the electronic internet impact on moving liquid chemicals and other things. In 2004, what was SP Plus, then called Standard Parking, invited me to come help them look on how to bring technology into the parking industry, and it was great because I got to jump into a whole new industry, try a whole new things, but it was always excited because when I looked at parking, I always viewed it as more of a logistics sort of activity, like how are we moving people, not goods. So through SP Plus, I was able to do a lot more with the clients and help bring technology into those clients. And we did remote management operations, and we did online reservations, and really just got to figure out how to bring technology to help operations and improve. And then 2 years ago, I came over to T2, great solution provider, and we've been working with them to work with our clients to help provide better solutions to those clients.
Fantastic. So what do you think's easier, oil and gas or parking?
Boy, both have their, I'll tell you, oil and gas catches on fire every once in a while, so I'm going to say maybe parking.
Parking can too, right? So
That's true.
You never know what's going to happen in the parking garage. So, well, that's awesome. That's a great background, and what really intrigued me, and the reason I wanted to talk to you guys today is I've been on your committee, the technology committee, for many years, and y'all do really great work with IPMI for not just furthering technology for the organizations you work with, but for the industry as a whole. And I really wanted to get a sense of some of the interesting things you've learned in that process and some of the interesting things that you've applied to the industry from the technology committee.
Yeah, I think the technology committee has been a great opportunity. I think there are so many people who have so many things to share, and the challenge, I think, for Peter and I when we started this, 12 years ago, was how do we get that information coalesced in a place that we can actually present it to people and get that information in front of them that actually has some merit and relevance to the issues that they are facing. And I think over the last 10 years, we've hopefully have done a good job of helping provide information to people that needed it.
I think it's a great committee. The IPI process cycles through volunteers every couple of years, and we've had folks that have actually been on there long term. And I took a little bit of hiatus, and I've been off for the last couple of years, but just got back on last month, basically. And I think what's been really interesting about the group is sort of their commitment to the industry, commitment to moving the industry forward from a technology perspective. We have a ton of folks on there from all sorts of industry business partners, university folks, municipal folks, and we ask them so often to take off their industry or their affiliation hat and to dive into the committee work and to help promote the technology that's happening, to talk about trends, to talk about things that they're seeing that will help move the industry forward. And so it's been a rewarding experience, and the technology committee does a really good job of, from our deliverable perspective, we have a presentation topic that we pick every year, develop that, and then take it on the road to all the state and regional associations that'll have us. Kick it off with a webinar after the first of the year, and then we have we'll do the presentation at the IPMI's annual conference. And so tons of exposure for the group and presentation opportunities, and of course, committee work can always be a little bit of a challenge to get everybody to it's kind of like herding cats kind of thing. A lot of parking analogies there too.
Maybe even tricking people into doing work.
That's
exactly,
right.
Exactly. But it is a volunteer thing, and we do a great job of developing that content and delivering it and turning into articles and other things that panel discussions and things like that.
It is fascinating. I again have sat on the committee, and it's fun to watch. I am not the most tech savvy person on that committee, but I get to sit back and watch. And you mentioned you have competitors in the vendor technology side of the world that are in that committee who all let their guard down and are propelling it forward. So it is fascinating to watch that, and the content that y'all have developed over the last 10 years. While it started in a very this is parking focused, we've gone autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles. This year's was curb lane management. It's fascinating to see some of the things that have come out of that group, and really to just demystify technology, because it has evolved at such a rapid pace over the last 10 years that if there wasn't a group doing that, we'd all be kind of backwards, not understanding what we were looking at. So kudos, good job.
Thanks. I think that is one of the challenges, is to take a lot of the conceptual ideas that are out there and try to find relevant real day applications to help it connect for people, so that when they go to a conference, they know that they can go back home and, here are the next 3 things you can do to start your path, or yourself down the path of these different concepts, whether it's mobility or data analytics or whatever it might be. I think that's been one of the key things to our success, is helping make it real and something that anyone can apply to their operations. And it's something we spend a lot of time as we put together these presentations doing. A typical presentation takes us about 10 months to put together. I don't know if people think that, on a Sunday night we come up with the idea and on the next Sunday we're doing a webinar, but it's a 9-month process, from the outline to the generation of the content to refining it to when the first presentation goes out. So it's a pretty heavy lift by usually 6 to 10 people every year.
I think that over the years, it's been a pretty good balance too, of like this year's curbside management, very practical and very today for what's going on, and talking about the technologies wrapped around that. But we've done some things that were kind of technology trend stuff, where we throw in some things that may or may not have ever come to fruition. But we try to pick radar issues that we think are going to be there. The autonomous presentation, that was like 5 years ago or something like that. So we felt we were kind of on the beginning of that, and you're trying to find data and information about when this is going to happen, or if it's going to happen, and what those impacts are going to be. People are talking about it today and have stronger opinions. And I saw a presentation yesterday where from a parking consulting firm, and they basically now have a kind of a stance that they take when it comes to answering the autonomous questions if they're going in talking to a customer. And I thought that was interesting. 5 years ago, everybody was like, we don't know. So it's kind of cool I think we've been on the front side of some of those things, and I think we provide really solid, good content.
Yeah, with that connected vehicle presentation, I actually gave that one a couple of times as part of the committee, and when they signed me up, Rachel, signs me up to go give them, like, I have no idea what connected vehicles, but you could tell that 10 months had gone into the presentation of developing material, content, notes in such a way that it was easy to explain, not only to the people giving it, but to the people out there. And like you said, I think one of the things that's really beneficial about it is it doesn't just look at the end game. It looks at all the steps we need to consider as parking professionals today. And it's the same thing with curb management. It's the same thing with payment portals, things like that you'll have done. That it's not just about the huge thing that's going to happen 20 years from now, but it's the baby steps that we need to be aware of today. So that's great. One of the things that I think the Technology Committee has done recently that I'm really excited about, or at least has been a part of, is the data standards project. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why we're doing that?
Yeah. So IPMI, about 3 years ago, started an effort to generate data standards. And the idea of the data standard isn't to tell people how to use data, but it's to develop a way to communicate between different entities data. So defining what a data element is, defining how it should be packaged up so that when you pass it from group A to group B, both parties know what's coming across. It's no different than any language, right? I need to know what the word means, you need to know what the word means, and then we can have a worthwhile conversation. So we started that about 3 years ago, and in that time, IPMI was able to engage with several other global parking groups, and we formed a international group now called the Alliance for Parking Data Standards, APDS, and that effort has become a global effort to help the parking industry engage not just internally with how to share data between different systems and groups, but also outside of the parking industry. We're now working with map manufacturers or map developers, automotive manufacturers. We're working with telecoms. We're working with the ITS industry. So we are engaging lots of different parties on how to engage data coming from the parking, and also how to help the parking industry engage with others to share that information. So it's been a really exciting and worthwhile effort, and we hope that the benefit of having a data standard is going to simplify how each of us interact with our peers and our technology providers, And when I say when we say ease that integration, first one is reducing the cost. Like when you have to buy a software package and you need to go integrate it with someone, right now it's a pretty hefty cost to do that integration because everything's customized. We're hoping through the data standards we'll be able to significantly reduce that, which then goes to what we've all talked about over time is how do we share data more quickly so that we can analyze it more effectively. So we're trying to reduce those barriers.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, when I got into parking in the 2008 timeframe, there was a lot of talk about what integration meant, and it was very intentional that it meant the technologies talk to one another, and we definitely haven't gotten to that point, but just the commonality of how they can talk to one another with manual downloads of data and comparing data and streaming data together is a huge lift. Are you finding that the vendor side of the community is on board with this and moving in that direction?
Yeah, I would say definitely yes, and especially across the globe, especially those entities that are doing business in both places, they're seeing the benefits of it. Because we have to remember, when a company says it costs this much to do an integration, it's not because they're trying to generate income. It's just the lack of definition around when I see the number 5 and I say 5 is a parking space. Well, my definition of parking space and the other receiving party's definition of parking space may be different. And both parties don't want to upset their mutual client by connecting data incorrectly. So all that cost goes into making sure we have the same definition. Am I sharing that data in the right way so that it ends up on your system the right way so that it can flow to reports? So I think most people recognize this is going to allow them to deliver more effective solutions to their clients. And there are very few solutions. I don't think there are actually any solutions in the world that can be everything to their client. You have to work with other people and other solutions to be effective in those clients' operations. So I would expect all of the technology providers to jump on board, and we're actually seeing most of that happen.
Can you talk a little bit about, there's thousands of data elements in our operations, and trying to define all of those, pick a number, is 1,000, 10,000, whatever that is. Talk a little bit about how the Alliance has kind of broken this down into a little bit more manageable pieces, and how that process is working.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think in the past when people have tried to do this, they've tried to do it all at one time, and it's just too many moving parts. It's like trying to grab wet spaghetti. You're never going to grab it all and pick it up. So we started at the fundamentals of, okay, what are the things that don't change very often? And that was a place, a location. How do we define a location? What attributes need to be associated to that location, whether it's a on-street curb or a parking garage or a surface lot. But then we broaden that definition of place, not just to think about parking, but to think about delivery zones and drop-off zones and taxi zones and restricted zones where we don't want people, and entries and exit lanes. So we started there to define the physical location of the world that we're looking at. We then started adding on data on top of that. We then went into rates. How did we find how to charge for a service or an activity, not just for parking? And then we've now kind of migrated into sessions, which is a form of a transaction. How do we identify when an event starts? How do we identify when an event ends? And that event can be a parking event. It could be a delivery event. It could be an Uber drop-off or an Uber pickup. How does someone access a certain area? So we're starting small, slowly growing, and working with our partners to make sure each of those data elements has enough buy-in that it's correct, that we can start to solidify that view.
And you're on the second or third round?
We are finishing up the second phase right now, with the goal of publishing that standard by the end of the year. And the third phase, which is going to go into financial transactions and best practices around messaging of data, so actually how to share the data. We're starting that up now with the goal of having that released by May of next year, so in concert with the IPMI National Convention down in San Antonio.
I think picking up on what Mike was just saying, is that where they did start with something that was everybody had a fairly common language around. It may have been, space versus place or things like that, but they saved that transactional stuff till later because they had to kind of work out how to the rules of engagement through those earlier processes to get to some of those harder things. I think this third round is going to be interesting.
It's going to be
you start talking about the money, they get a little squirrely, the transaction information. So, but it's great. I mean, that's on the consulting side. I think one of the things I see most often is that we have more data than we've ever had before in our lifetimes as parking and mobility professionals, but we're completely paralyzed by the amount of that data and what to do with it. And if we can break down the first barrier, which is nomenclature and commonality, we're already starting to make better headways. And from a data analytics, data driven performance standpoint, what's your end goal? I mean, what are you hoping that universities and cities throughout the country and the world are going to be able to start doing more with their data, and what does that look like to you?
Well, I think our goals are twofold. One is to reduce the cost of allowing systems to talk to each other. It goes back to that point.
Yep.
We're in a connected world. Everyone can't do everything. You need to work with other parties, and there are a lot of industries that want to engage the parking industry but don't know how to. So that's the first one, is to provide a language and a method for other entities to engage the parking industry. The second one is really around the definitions, is to make sure that when we say validation versus coupon, in my past I've known, like on the East Coast, a validation was a coupon, and
right.
on the West Coast a coupon was a validation. So we had the same concept, but we were using different terminology for it, which would always cause issues in accounting practices. By having a common definition, we hope that helps simplify some of the miscommunication that sometimes happens. And in the worst cases, those miscommunications end up being expensive software changes down the road. So by having that common definition, we'll be able to close that gap more quickly, which helps with KPIs and benchmarking.
It does, and I mean, it's expensive for the investment in the software, but if we're misinterpreting data as well, it's expensive on the practical implementation, capital policy side as well. So if we can make that easier, not every program is a Texas A&M that's got data scientists and a large, robust data analytics component. Some of them are just parking directors and parking managers that are kind of forging their way on their own, and let's just make their life a little easier as well. So that's great. Peter, to pick on you for a second, I mean, how are you using data at A&M today, and where have you been successful in using data to drive change on campus?
So, with our systems for years and years and years, I mean, we realized the beauty and the power of that information, and having that information as readily available as possible. And I like telling the story way back when, I mean, this decade ago or something like that, when we built our first dashboard online, just trying to get more visibility into our operations to more of our people so they can see more numbers and have more interesting things. And I had a group of student leaders that want to come in and talk to me about a grace period. We need a grace period at the beginning of the school year. Used to have one years ago. It was a mess. Much better process to get everybody to have their permit in their hand before they show up and park and do what they're supposed to. But for some reason, they were kind of bringing this back up, and the cornerstone of their argument was that freshmen didn't know what to do, and freshmen were getting all the tickets. And so we were sitting in the conference room, and I pulled up our big dashboard, multiple graphs and screens, all real time, day old, 24-hour-old data. And so it was clicking while they were talking to pull up the stats of citations issued for the last couple of years of August during move-in to see who got all the tickets, and lo and behold, it was seniors that were those winners, not the freshmen. So the freshmen actually got the least tickets during move-in, and the seniors got the most, and so that was the end of the argument. But it's a kind of a small example. We've kind of taking that and trying to continue to push it through the organization, both on the parking, transit, and the fleet side. So from the parking perspective, I mean, it does come down to looking at where students live, where they park, what their preferences to where they park, if they're not parking where their preferences are, permit allocations, occupancy stuff, both manual counting, real-time counting in different facilities. Every way to slice and dice anything that you could imagine from a transaction perspective, to be able to see what piece of equipment is used the most, to what gate goes up and down the most, to what would then be needed for PM schedules and things like that. We also do some cool stuff on the GIS side to be able to map students' locations and the bus routes, to be able to see if our routes are matching up with all their home locations, to see if we're serving the biggest population clusters for students in town. So it just kind of runs the gamut throughout the operation. We do have we use Tableau to be able to start linking some things together outside of some of the dashboards that we have. We do have a grad student that's in the data science field to be able to help us with that and start to put more things together as we need to try to sleuth through the data, so to speak.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah.
And I think that's what's kind of so exciting now with all the new technologies that are out there, and especially as we start getting into, if I dare say, even artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have systems that can crunch all of this data. And if you don't have those definitions, to your point earlier, Brett, you get crazy answers that no one believes in. And then, therefore, what is the value of the data analytics? But it goes back to kind of what gets measured gets managed. And if you aren't measuring stuff and you don't know what you're trying to manage, then you're just looking at data. And I don't think any of us really want to get lost in that trap of just looking at thousands and thousands of reports. We all want to be able to drive change and be impactful with our operations. So getting that data and understanding what we're trying to achieve is critical, so you can manage and measure the right things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are the two big upfront things: manage and measure and manage. And then the bigger piece that we see on the consulting side is communicate, right? So taking this really interesting, sleuthed out data you've done and finding a way to communicate it back to the campus in a meaningful way so they understand why we're trying to drive change.
We did a little thing a couple of years ago, and it's not even certainly couldn't call it a data science thing, but we actually did a little marketing around folks that were getting citations at night that didn't have a permit and weren't paying the machines in a couple rec sports centric areas, and so they didn't get a citation message, hey, you got a ticket. They get a marketing message of how do you buy a night permit, or how do you pay by phone to be able to avoid getting those, but without even mentioning that they got a ticket. Just sort of, hey, by the way, trying to nudge you in the right direction.
Yeah, education is critical. You can educate everybody, and some of the folks will still continue to misbehave, but a large proportion of them, if they just knew what they needed to know, could go in the right direction.
So with IoT as another acronym we can throw out that's kind of a buzzword, how are you seeing that deployed on your campus, and how are you guys using some of those new technologies to supply you with more data to do those sort of things?
Well, yes, today everything has an IP address and everything is connected, and from the cameras that we have on campus, the cameras on the buses, to the sensors that are in garages, to the pay stations and machines and point of sales and the devices that the officers are carrying around in the field are all connected, and they're all there today. And it is pretty amazing the amount of information and the amount of data points that are there. The trick is trying not to get overwhelmed in that, as we were saying a minute ago. I'm not sure I've got anything that's super duper cutting edge or super duper different today. I think the program continues to evolve and build on some of those core foundations that we did a number of years ago, kind of when we started doing those things. So, and granted, I take some of it for granted, and I know a lot of folks don't have some of the things that we have, or some of the insight into our systems that we have. Is there something that you were thinking of?
Well, I was going to, if you remember, I think it was maybe 4 years ago, we did that data presentation, and when we're talking about managing data and sharing data, when we had all the data within our own systems, it was easy to control and the data security. But now that we're sharing data and more private information, tracking someone's Bluetooth
Or
device on
license
their
plates
phone
or Bluetooth,
or
yeah.
license plates, it's,
Yeah.
the onus on all of us to be good shepherds of that data and to track who's accessing that data. And when that data leaves our own confines or our own boundaries,
Yep.
how do we know that the people using it aren't misusing it?
Yeah, that's a good point. We were having a conversation around license plates the other day, and once you have all the license plates in your system and you're reading them several times a day, and all of a sudden it doesn't take too many days to build up a couple 100,000 reads where you're seeing that information, but to make sure they understand your data retention policy and what you're using that information for, and ours after 30 days, if we don't need it for anything, which typically is a citation, then it's going to go away. Same thing with video, there's a little bit higher degree of comfort that comes along with it. I think there's still some, from organizations, especially higher ed, about giving or sharing any sort of data with an outside entity. It's one thing to anonymize it, and somebody need how many tickets did you write, or how many reads did you get, or how many permits do you sell, or demographic kind of stuff. But individual LPs or individual permit information or anything personally identifiable, I think is very verboten to share.
Well, on the vendor side, Mike, I mean, you are probably hearing more about the data security needs. I mean, with your software, the Flex package that has worlds of information that you can tie into about license plates, citations, permits, all those types of things. What are y'all doing on the data security side of things to kind of help your clients before they know they need help?
I mean, I think the first thing, and not so much about T2, but anyone buying the product, is make sure that you have ownership of the data. I mean, that's one of the things we're always clear about. We don't own the data. It's not our data. It's your data. You tell us what you want to do with it, and we're basically going to block everyone out. But as we all know, and we've read in many articles, data is today's oil.
Yeah.
And everyone wants access to data. There are a lot of companies that are trying to get access to data because they want to package it up, and they can do things from a marketing, advertising, or many different ways. So I think it's critical as people look at what they're doing with data, is thinking about the ownership and that it is a valuable asset. And just like you would protect your car, or if you had gold bullion, you would protect that, you probably need to think about how are you protecting this little bits and bytes of information that are floating around your networks, and how are you controlling it and making sure you know where it's going and who's accessing it.
Right. I mean, we almost would think that it's not valuable data, but it's incredibly valuable. All of the information we have at our fingertips. I was actually talking with one of the TNC operators recently, and I mean, they have data that we all want to see because we want to make policy decisions about it. But what was amazing to me was that they want to see our data too. They want to see what you're generating and what's coming out of your system, because it helps them drive policy information. And if we're doing it in a collaborative way and sharing data with one another, we can make meaningful change, but we also open ourselves up to all types of security issues. So it's very scary. Yeah. Well, and we could talk data all day long. I love data. But let's talk a little bit about, let's switch gears. What you have been ingrained in the technology side of the world for quite some time now. What do you see coming down the pipe that's the next big thing from a technology perspective, and what are you excited about coming out in the parking and mobility world?
Well, for me, it goes back to before I came into parking, being in logistics, and I've always been excited about the idea of parking transforming itself into more of like people logistics. How do we move people from point A to point B? And then, when you had IPI go to IPMI, adding mobility, it's just, I think that's where we're heading. It's parking is where we store cars, and maybe even parking garages are changing to where more of their transportation hubs, where people are just transitioning modes of transportation, whether they're getting on and off a scooter or a bike, or whether it's an airplane and a car or whatever it might be. I'm excited about us finally engaging and broadening our vision to what's always been around us to help people move from point A to point B, recognizing the destination was never a garage. It was a classroom, it was an office, it was a restaurant. And I think as professional and as an industry, we're finally engaging in that conversation, and I think we're going to be able to add a lot more value to the things that we've done for the last 50 years, we're really going to be able to accelerate that value.
That's interesting. There are a lot of organizations out there like IPMI or NACTO or ACT who are all really fascinated about this mobility thing and want to grab onto it and figure out how we position our worlds and the worlds around us to be better. And I think it's now incumbent on us to really engage those people across the other sides of the aisle in the transportation, mobility, commute world to make it better, because it is all one big holistic system. If we're not doing it together, we're all gonna fail. So, what about you? What are you seeing?
Well, I do think such a big part of that comes back to our industry, from managing on street or the curb management, which or the off street surface or structured, and we've been doing that for a long time. And I really think that the policies, procedures, the technology, the products, and the services that we've been using for the last 20 years are quite analogous to the issues that are happening today, particularly around curbside management. And so I'm not sure there's like a silver bullet for curbside management or some of the things that are there, but I think it's pretty cool that the technology that we're using and have used for a number of years, LPR, cameras, sensors, can really help manage what we think is going to happen with shared services. And so from a shared perspective, they want the access to the curb. Cities usually manage that. It could be on or off, could be private operators. And so then becomes this whole kind of management thing that gets wrapped around shared. And I think that's going to be a big part of what we end up doing for the next number of years to be able. But I think we have the tools. I don't think that we have. I don't think we're waiting for a new piece of technology to parachute in. I think we have the bits and pieces of it. May not be integrated quite. There might not be one out-of-the-box solution today, but there are the bits and pieces that are there. I think things, it's like on the transit side of the house, things that link the modes together. Then I think multimodal is still going to be a big part of what we do for a long time, and tools that help link those modes together. Uber's starting to do some of that with their scooter stuff, and then also have added public transit to their apps to be able to see different modes and linking of modes to be able to get where you can, and facilitating the payment and things like that. So I think there's some kind of cool stuff that'll happen around those technologies, especially when you start linking that trip planning with the payment and with a seamless kind of experience and things like that. So I think we'll start to see some movement and some changes in that space as well. Anything that use the word track, but anything that helps increase the amount of data that we get from the users of the system, be it bikes or scooters or people or skateboards or buses or cars. So I think sensors and things that will help give everybody a better picture of what's going on. And I really think, Mike mentioned it before, from an AI or machine learning perspective, somebody's probably going to come in to be able to figure out how to help visualize sort of the problem that we're having and provide better solutions.
I want to go back to something he said, because I think it's so important for the professionals in our industry to hear. When you talk about, we already have the skills and the experience and the knowledge, I can't agree more, especially with where things are headed. We always talk about parking permits and parking enforcement. Drop the word parking and put delivery service or rideshare service permit, rideshare service enforcement. I think that is such a great point, and I hope our peers in the industry recognize they've got the skills that everyone else is trying to bang around in the dark, trying to figure out. And for us, it's just widening, getting rid of the side blinders and saying, oh, I can apply those same skills in other places. And we know the tricks of the trades, and we've been through that for the last 30 years. And we have the ability to help so many other entities that are trying to figure it out right now. I think that's exciting for professionals in this industry.
That's a really great point. I mean, one of the big things I hear a lot about when we talk about curb management is as we lose parking spaces, which we're going to do, on-street parking is going to begin to evaporate, and it's going to become other uses, food trucks, and Uber, Lyft, and micromobility, and we have to monetize that to continue to have management, control, and revenue streams. And that's a great point. Who's been monetizing the curb for the past 100 years, right? We have, right? There may be others out there that have great policy decisions and ways to prioritize things, but it's incredibly important for us to be at the table to help make those decisions and tie those technology points and management tools together. That's fascinating. I've never heard anybody say that, so that's really cool.
So take that, what we just talked about, and I haven't flown through LAX since they made the change with Uber and moved it away, but it's certainly been in the papers and it's certainly kind of reverberating through the mobility industry.
It looks terrible. It looks terrible.
Bad.
Yeah.
It looks bad.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have done that
Yeah.
way. I mean, I don't know what resources and assets they had available, but it sure, to me, sounds like more of like a curb management, queuing, logistics issue than just to run some buses and move everybody away, when there was probably a parking resource very close by that could have been used to monetize the revenue stream from Uber and Lyft and make it more convenient for the customer.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think there are garages in that center of that turn. And that would have been a perfect application. Take 2 or 3 of the levels of one garage and turn it into, like a lot of airports are doing, a ride share delivery pickup zone. Charge an entry fee into that. You solve lots of, get them off the driveway, get people a safe place to change cars, and generate some additional income.
Right. Offset the parking revenue that you may not be getting anymore. But I mean,
It might increase. I mean, if it's something a buck an entry and you're turning that 30 times a day and you're only charging 20,
And you get rid of bus costs now, and
yeah.
and technology to ease access, entry and egress, technology to put in place to help people to find their cars, outside of even what Uber and Lyft can do inside their things. But you have obviously GPS and cell signals inside the garage, so there's additional technology that could be placed to help mitigate those things. I just run parking.
it's just a couple guys' views in Phoenix.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I find it interesting. One of your things that you see coming is the kind of the commute platform, the commute decision platform, and there have been some commute platforms that have come and gone, and one of the biggest things has been payment and then consolidation of multiple vendors into one commute platform. Like the Uber doesn't want to be in a commute platform with Lyft, right? So they've started creating their own. They've got the Lime scooters, and they've got, you can get an Uber and whatever else they're offering in the market. But I think that's a fascinating one. I think whoever can figure that out is gonna begin to dominate the commute market. And from a university setting, 80% of your population are Generation Z or younger coming in, and all they've ever known from a transportation perspective is options, right? Like when we grew up, it was I drove, and then I drove, and then I drove, but they're looking to bike, walk, scooter, bus, whatever's the most convenient, most affordable, most sustainable for them that day. And I've not seen anybody yet who's able to really pull all that together. I think the university world offers probably the best environment for it because you control everything. But even then, it still just hasn't happened yet.
Right. I think it will. I think there's probably smart people that are working on it, and I think like a lot of things that we've seen, potentially could happen on a university campus before they happen someplace else.
It's amazing. I mean, this one we're in Phoenix right now for the NACAS conference, and ASU's Tempe campus is largely becoming a small city. Like it's partially academic, partially private, and so it's just a microcosm of everything that we're trying to do in every part of our industry. So, one last one. Any experience with just some of the autonomous vehicles and things like that are starting to come into the market in a pilot phase? Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, we are doing a pilot right now. It's been going on for about 80 days, and it's got about 10 more days to go. It's a 12-passenger slow-moving shuttle from Navia. It's a company out of France. They've done a number of pilots and some implementations around the country. Michigan M City has one. we actually started to do it last year, and NHTSA pulled the permit. Puts the federal highway folks outside their comfort zone when a vehicle doesn't have a gas pedal, a brake, or a steering wheel, and is run by an Xbox controller.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more paperwork to do, and we brought it back for a longer term test. That demo was just going to be for a week or so. We're running it on a plaza in front of the stadium, and but this year's demo, basically all September, October, and half of November, has been on street on a fairly active part of campus that has bus routes, bike lanes, ped crossings, even has some gates, a limited access street, so motors through the gates pop open forward. It's got a transponder and stuff. It's been really kind of interesting, and so, you know, from a safety perspective, it's been fine, but it was doing a hard brake thing for a little while, and it really wasn't because it saw a squirrel or a leaf or a pedestrian or a bike or anything like that. It was a software fix that came out that introduced a complication to the braking system, and so the shuttle provides real-time telemetry back to France, and they'll start to see things, and then they'll troubleshoot what that issue is, and then over the air, send a fix down to be able to help with the hard braking and things like that. So it's been interesting. You know, people aren't afraid of it or anything like that. They don't mind getting on it. They don't mind riding it. They don't mind, interacting with it. There wasn't a sort of a trepidation from the user perspective at all. But logistically, things would pop up, and like we didn't, even though my department's coordinating the deployment with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. We have a theater on campus, had a load in for the theater, moved the buses out into the shuttle route, didn't tell the shuttle route folks. And so the buses were where the shuttle usually goes. And it's a combination of a mapped route using really hyper accurate GPS antenna that we have on campus, plus LiDAR and other sensors. And those buses being in its path, it didn't like that at all. So forgot to tell you we were moving the buses today, shuttle. And so we had to down the shuttle until we got the route cleared and things like that. So it's been really interesting it's super on the forefront of technology, and you certainly learned it's electric, so Texas hot, here hot. What are those operating hours? And that was one of the comments we got early back from the event. The Navia folks was like, the batteries are usually last much longer. What's going on? Like, well, it's 100 degrees, so
yeah, it's hot.
It's hot.
Yeah,
and then you can't just open the windows.
Well, that's cool. That's really cool. I like to hear the success stories like that. I mean, there's always the perception that that's a ways off, but we're seeing it come to fruition now. So it's good to hear successful ventures with that and how it's being implemented in a campus context. So.
And our joke is, of course, always, and it's been a long time joke, is that on our transit system, we've always had autonomous buses, but we're hiring drivers as fast as we can.
Fair enough. Well, this has been fascinating. I do appreciate y'all taking the time and coming to do your first podcast, and I think great conversation. Anything else you want to add to your industry colleagues out there?
Nothing. If you want to come out and help out with the technology committee, we're always looking for volunteers.
They will put you to work. So, well, guys, thanks, and I appreciate talking with you, and thank you for everything you're doing with the industry.
Thanks, Brett.